Welcome to our video on understanding plot. Our goal for this video will be to give you a chance to review and to know the different parts of a plot, write the definitions down for future reference, and complete a practice plot map or plot line. As a review, make sure that you are looking for that little pencil symbol. Whenever you see that, you need to stop the video, pause it, and write something down. Use the rule of 5 so that you get your ideas down in a short form rather than copying everything. And then pause as often as you need to. It is okay to stop and to think about it, even if you aren't writing something down. So let's start with the first question of what is plot. You'll be writing this down in your notes. Plot is the structure and the events of a story. What makes up the story and what makes it interesting. So take a minute and write that down. So without the structure or the plot of a story, you really wouldn't have a story. You'd have just a bunch of ideas, a bunch of events that don't seem to connect to each other, rather like you would have if you just had a whole bunch of boards. But with plot, you start putting things together so you can start to see that there's something actually going on. And a well-written story will have everything fleshed out so that it's interesting to you as the reader. But without the structure and events of the story, you really don't have a story. So let's go over the 7 parts of what goes into a plot. The first is the exposition. Now, the exposition is the very first part of the story, and it provides the background information that you need to really understand what is going to be happening in the story. It gives you just enough information. So in the exposition, some of the things that we learn about are the situation, what's going on before the action starts, that would be helpful for you to understand the story. You'll also learn who the main characters are, especially the protagonist, who is your main character, and the antagonist. It's either the person or the force that's working against the protagonist, making it difficult for them to accomplish whatever they're trying to do. And the setting. This is where and when the story is taking place. In other words, it's place and time. And all of these things, the one way to think about the exposition is that if you or a friend have ever been to a movie and you missed the first 15 to 20 minutes and the rest of the movie you're trying to figure out, well, who's that and why are they doing that and what's going on? Well, that's because you've missed the exposition, that first part that gives you that information that you need to get what's going on. So pause and fill out the section under number 1, exposition, and everything that's underneath it. Okay, let's look at the example, the Finding Nemo example. This is on the bottom of your note page. And the first thing, even if you're not familiar with the movie, this will still help you. So in the exposition, here are some of the things that we learn about. Situation, we have a single dad who's worried about his son. The son has a bum fin. We know that we have our characters right now are Marlin and Nemo. Those are our protagonists. There will be the antagonists will come later. We know that where this is happening, and it's at the Great Barrier Reef off of Australia, and the time is present day. So that's all the information you need to know in order to get into the rest of the story. So pause and make sure you're writing that down on the plot map on your notes. The second thing, number 2, is your inciting incident. The inciting incident is important. It's because it's the event that kind of gets the story started. It's the key that turns on the story. Without it, there wouldn't be a clear conflict because it causes, in many ways, the conflict of the story to happen. Make sure you pause and use the rule of 5 to write down what you know about the inciting incident. Okay. Going back to Finding Nemo, the inciting incident here is when the Australian divers come and take pictures and then leave with Nemo. If those guys hadn't come around, the rest of the story wouldn't have happened, and they create the problem. Now, Make sure you pause. So once the inciting incident happens, that then creates the conflict, and the conflict is absolutely essential to a story. Without the conflict, there really isn't any story, because the conflict is that problem or the struggle that's happening between two forces in a story that makes it interesting and gives the story real structure. Now, there are multiple kinds of conflicts. Sometimes it can be a human versus another human. So, for example, in Harry Potter, you've got, Harry versus Voldemort. Very strong, very clear two groups of people kind of against each other. You can also have human versus nature. These are those stories where a group of people are trying to survive out in the wilderness, or maybe they are in the middle of a huge storm and they're trying to survive the storm, or they're experiencing a tsunami, those kinds of things where something in nature is making it difficult for a person or a group of people to survive. Human versus society, these are your stories like Hunger Games. Hunger Games where you have a group of people that are fighting against the social structure where they live. And then human versus self, this means that the conflict is actually with one's own self. So if somebody that's scared of the dark, that's a problem that you have with yourself and that you have to learn to overcome. So pause and make sure you take notes on the different kinds of conflicts and what conflict is. All right, for our Finding Nemo example, this has both kind of not humans exactly, but the characters versus the characters. You have Marlin, who's needing to get back his son. But then both of them, this is more the internal, the human versus self, both of them need to kind of learn to feel confidence in their own abilities. So that's the conflict that goes throughout. So pause and make sure you have that written down. All right, number 4 is the rising action. This is the bulk of the story. In other words, most of a story is going to be the rising action. These are all the events that happen as the characters are trying to solve the problem or dealing with things as they come. These things are intense, they're exciting, and it's really why we love the stories, is because we get to see all of this action. So pause and write down, using the rule of 5, definition for what rising action is. All right, in our Finding Nemo example, the rising action includes once Nemo's off to Australia and Marlin's trying to get him, you have events like when Marlin meets Dory, meeting the sharks, dealing with the jellyfish, meeting Crush the turtle. Then you have the whole story with Nemo becoming friends with the fish that are in the tank, Nemo trying all these different ways to be able to escape and get back to his dad. All of these things, the conflict hasn't been resolved, but these are all a result of the conflict. And it's what makes most of the story. I'll pause and get those things written down. All right, number 5 is the climax. This is the peak of the plot line. This is the turning point in the story, the moment of most intensity. After this, the story will never be the same. Oftentimes there may be a decision that the main character, the protagonist, has to make, but it's a point of no return. There's no way you can go back to the way that things were before. So take a minute to focus on the definition in white. All right, so what's our climax in Finding Nemo? The climax comes when Nemo has to escape from Darla or die. So if you remember, Darla is the dentist's niece, and she's a fish killer because she shakes the bag. And so Nemo is faced with the decision: is he going to let that happen, or is he going to try to escape and really make it back to his dad? So at this point, it's kind of now's really what's going to happen. How are things going to end? Pause and make sure you write that down. All right, number 6 is the falling action. These are the events that happen after the climax and maybe still a little connected to the climax, but things are starting to resolve. The results of the climax are coming through, and things, the problems are starting to end. And you can just tell that the story is starting to wrap up. So pause and write down your notes. So in Finding Nemo, this is when Nemo and Zed are actually reunited, and Nemo saves Dory from the little thing with the net. So connected to the climax, but things are starting to end. They're not over yet, but things are ending. Pause and make sure you write that down. All right, finally we have the resolution. Things are resolved in the resolution. This problem, for the most part, is solved, or the problem simply no longer exists. But there's no more story to tell because the conflict is over. So what does that look like in Finding Nemo? Here, Marlin has confidence. He's finally able to tell his joke. He's no longer overprotective of his son. Nemo's confident and happy. So everything is fine. They're together, and everything is going to be better from here on out. And so things are resolved. Pause and make sure you write that down. All right, so you finished watching this particular video on plot. Remember that you want to make sure that in your guided notes that you write out your summary and your hot question and have your notes ready for class, for the activities that we do in class. When you go to turn this in on Schoology or Scooge, if you have a paper copy, you need to make sure you take a good quality picture, load it into Notability, increase the size of the picture so it comes out large enough online, and then submit it. All right, that's all, folks.